It's a pleasure to bring on the stage someone who is the Coral Reef Restoration Lead for NOAA, co-chair of the International Coral Restoration Consortium. Please welcome onto the stage one of the most powerful advocates for corals. Please welcome Tom Moore. Tom.
Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon. So I know we've got a lot of space fans in the room, so I figured what better place to start our exploration of coral reefs than the International Space Station. As I'm sure Anusha can attest, when you look back down at Earth from the space station, you see these wondrous underwater islands that surround some of our most valuable and iconic and populous places. Those underwater islands are in fact coral reefs and form one of the most important ecosystems on the planet. Are they rocks? Are they plants? Are they animals? In fact, coral reefs are all three and form together by the trillions to form the vast seascapes we can see from space and one of the largest living creatures on the planet. As you gaze longer at the reef, you'll realize it's not just the corals that are alive, though. The entire reef is as abuzz with activity as Manhattan at rush hour. On closer inspection, you might even notice one of the nearly 100 million people that recreate on or near reefs every year. But reefs play a much bigger role than being pretty pictures. They literally feed large portions of the developing world. They play an outsized role in the world's fisheries production and provide primary food security to 500 million people in Asia alone. And reefs don't just feed these communities. They provide their first line of defense against coastal storms and serve as a revenue generator worth nearly $10 trillion. But what's often lost on many people is how deeply connected many communities are to their reefs. Unfortunately, the president of Palau could not be with me here on stage as originally planned, but I will share with you what I'm certain he would have said. The reef is the lifeblood of their culture and their economy. It is their protector, both physically and spiritually. Without it, they would be doomed. And it's not just Palau. For many island countries, the question is not if reef loss would destroy them. It's just what would come first: the loss of their economy, their culture, or the unmitigated waves. And it's not just coastal communities that benefit from coral reefs. The same chemical compounds that corals use to protect themselves from predators on the reef are finding their way into next-generation treatments for cancer, HIV, cardiovascular disease, and many other ailments. Who knows what other cures are still lurking beneath the surface waiting to be discovered? Unfortunately, this is where the story takes a more somber turn. As many of you have maybe heard on the news over the last few years, the Great Barrier Reef, the largest reef system in the world in Australia, has been undergoing a massive mortality event. In just 2 years, we've lost 50% of the live coral on the Great Barrier Reef. And the Great Barrier Reef was not the canary in the coal mine. It's the latest victim in a well-predicted mass mortality event that's been underway since the late 1990s, gaining speed and intensity every year since. So what's going on? Who here knows what the normal human body temperature is? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, right? What happens if that goes up 3 degrees for a few hours? You're not feeling very good. What about 6 degrees for a few hours? Things are not looking good, and you're probably on your way to the emergency room. Now imagine that same 6-degree fever for weeks. That's exactly what's happening to coral reefs as a result of climate change around the world. And as amazing as corals are, they simply cannot handle that degree of temperature increase. They quickly turn a stark white, what we call bleaching, and if the temperature does not go down within a few weeks, that bleaching literally turns to death as a result of starvation. We've lost 50% of the world's coral reefs already from climate change. We could lose the remainder by the end of the century, if not sooner. But what if we do something about climate change? Many of you in this room are on the forefront of the technologies that might just help reverse the climate trend. Those technologies might save humanity. They are unfortunately not likely to save the coral reefs. Carbon already committed to the atmosphere is predicted to result in more frequent and severe bleaching events for at least 3 decades, even if we stopped carbon emissions today. That sets us up for a mass mortality event and a mass extinction event. This is an unacceptable answer to the billions of people that rely on coral reefs, and it certainly was not an acceptable answer to our team. So we sat down with experts on bringing species back from the brink from the Smithsonian Institution. And what they told us was that we needed to do 3 things that were actually backwards of traditional conservation thinking. You see, normally you're taught that you first address the underlying issue, in this case, climate change, before beginning to take a cautious approach to restoration and further interventions. However, what they prescribed for reefs was that we begin to immediately rebuild corals with more resilient and diverse ones, that we work faster and more aggressively than we would ever think necessary, and we do all of this while combating climate change and other stressors at the same time. They explained that if we waited to address the threats, that we would likely be left with nothing to restore. Fortunately, over the last 15 years, a number of small efforts have gotten better at rebuilding reefs. We have some sites where we are restoring reefs to their historic level of cover and function through restoration. The trick, though, working into the future, is going to be to make sure that we have corals that are going to be able to withstand that temperature increase that I told you about. To do this, we're actually going to need to tweak Mother Nature a little bit. Fortunately, we already know that after every mortality event, there are winners and losers. Some corals survive, some don't. Those winners might represent the next generation of corals. We also know that repeated sublethal exposure to higher temperatures helps make some corals stronger and more resilient to those same high temperatures again in the future. By combining the evolutionary underpinning of survival of the fittest with the mantra of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, we might just be able to have corals that can withstand that 6-degree fever. You might be tempted to think we're on track for success. Unfortunately, that could not be further from the truth. The gap that exists between success at the local level and success at the ecosystem level is not big, it is massive. If we continue on the same path we are on today, it would take centuries to restore the world's coral reefs, even if we threw more money at the problem. The Great Barrier Reef is 1,800 miles long. It's going to take a lot more than divers and baskets of corals to make a difference. This last part of the puzzle is why I'm standing here today. We know that restoration and resiliency are part of the solution. We know that scaling up is needed. We know our problem is just as much about engineering as it is about biology. What we don't know is how to take our local successes and make them global solutions. I don't know whether the ultimate solution will be swarms of coral robots replanting reefs or coral reef Viagra. But what I do know is that we need crazy ideas and the people that can turn those crazy ideas into breakthroughs. And that's why Saving Coral Reefs needs an XPRIZE. The challenges we face are similar to those that have been overcome in other fields. And those of us that have looked closely at the issue firmly believe the tech exists to solve the problem. The problem is we don't have the right people sitting at the same table at the same time with an incentive to solve it. The challenge is huge, the goal is audacious, but saving coral reefs might just help save the world, while at the same time as we lift fishermen out of poverty, protect entire countries from natural disasters, and feed billions of people along the way. I hope you'll consider joining us on this journey.
Thank you, Tom.